Widower mountain man ordered a caretaker, but they sent him an obese 16-year-old. Snow falls heavy in the Rockies. A lonely widower, scarred by loss, waits for the caretaker he ordered to see him through the winter. But when the stagecoach door opens, out steps not a matron but a frightened 16-year-old girl, overweight and desperate for a place to belong. He wants to send her back, but the pass is closed. As the storm rages, she proves her courage, saving his life more than once. Just when he begins to see her as family, riders thunder up the trail. They claim the girl is no orphan at all, but the lost daughter of a powerful man, come to reclaim her. Torn between wealth and love, law and mercy, the mountains hold their breath. What will matter more in the end? Blood, or the bond they've built by firelight? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you then, you're part of this story too. The October wind whistled through the pines as Nathaniel Brandt stood on his cabin's front porch, leaning heavily on his wooden cane. His weathered face creased with anticipation as he watched the stagecoach lumber up the muddy mountain trail. The wheels splashed through puddles, sending brown spatter across the coach's worn red paint. "About time," he muttered, adjusting his grip on the cane. His bad leg ached something fierce with the coming storm. Dark clouds loomed over the San Juan Mountains, promising early snow. He'd ordered a caretaker weeks ago through the general store in Silverton, someone sturdy and capable to help him through another harsh winter. At his age, with his bum leg, he couldn't manage everything alone anymore, much as it pained him to admit it. The stagecoach creaked to a stop, mud sucking at its wheels. The driver, old Pete, scrambled down from his perch, his gray beard wagging as he opened the passenger door. "Got your help right here, Mr. Brandt." Nathaniel's eyes widened as a girl stepped hesitantly down, Pete steadying her arm. She couldn't have been more than 16, with a round, soft face and nervous eyes. Her faded calico dress stretched tight across her ample frame, and she clutched a small cloth bundle to her chest like a shield. "There must be some mistake," Nathaniel said, his voice gruff with dismay. "I ordered a proper caretaker, not a child." The girl's cheeks flushed pink, but she lifted her chin. "I'm Delilah Truesdale, sir. Mrs. Henderson at the employment office said you needed help with cooking and cleaning. I can do all that, and more besides." "Now, see here," Nathaniel started, but Pete cut him off with an apologetic wave. "Storm's coming fast, Mr. Brandt. Pass'll be closed by nightfall. Next coach won't run till spring thaw." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Best get inside soon, weather's turning mean." Nathaniel ran a calloused hand over his face. The girl, Delilah, stood quietly, her eyes downcast. A gust of wind set her shivering in her thin dress. "Much obliged for the delivery, Pete," Nathaniel said finally, his tone resigned. "Best get moving before that storm catches you." Pete tipped his hat, scrambled back onto his perch, and with a snap of the reins, the stagecoach rumbled away. Delilah watched it go, her shoulders tense. "Well, come on then," Nathaniel said gruffly. "No sense standing out here catching your death." He led the way inside, his cane thumping against the wooden floor. The cabin was sparse but solid. One main room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A ladder led to the sleeping loft above. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and a black iron cook stove radiated welcome warmth. "You can take the loft," Nathaniel said, gesturing with his cane. "There's a bedroll up there. I'll fetch more blankets before night falls." Delilah nodded, still clutching her bundle. "Thank you, sir." Her voice was soft but clear. "Stew's nearly ready," he added, moving to the cook stove where a pot bubbled. "Hope you're hungry." "Yes, sir. Thank you." She stood awkwardly by the door until he waved her toward the table. "Sit, girl. No need to hover." She perched carefully on a wooden chair, arranging her skirts. Nathaniel ladled thick venison stew into 2 tin bowls, set one before her with a chunk of cornbread, then took his own seat across the table. The lamplight cast dancing shadows on the log walls as they ate in silence. Delilah's movements were careful, almost dainty. but she cleaned her bowl thoroughly, sopping up the last bits of gravy with her cornbread. Her eyes kept darting to the pot on the stove. "There's more if you want it," Nathaniel said. When she hesitated, he added, "No sense going hungry. Winter's hard enough with a full belly." "Thank you, sir." She accepted a second helping gratefully, though her cheeks flushed again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Snow began pattering against the window glass. Nathaniel built up the fire while Delilah insisted on washing the dishes, her movements quick and practiced. "Mrs. Henderson said you needed someone through the winter months," she ventured as she dried the bowls. "I can cook and clean, tend chickens if you have them. I know some herb lore too, for medicines and such." "Where'd you learn all that?" Nathaniel asked, settling in his chair by the fire. She ducked her head. "Here and there. Mostly at the poor farm outside Denver before Mrs. Henderson found me this position." Something in her tone made him look closer. The girl was young, yes, but there was old pain in her eyes. She finished with the dishes and retrieved her bundle from where she'd left it by the door. "If it's all right, sir, I'll ready for bed now. It was a long journey." Nathaniel nodded. "Mind your head on the beams up there, and there's extra quilts in the chest if you need them." She climbed the ladder carefully, her skirts hampering her movements. A few minutes later, he heard quiet rustling as she arranged her bedding. The wind howled outside, and snow fell harder, but the cabin was warm and snug. Just as Nathaniel was banking the fire for the night, he heard a small sound from above. Glancing up, he saw Delilah seated cross-legged in the lamplight, something glinting in her hands. It was a locket, silver by the look of it, though tarnished with age. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman in fine clothes, her face proud and beautiful. "That's mighty fancy," he observed. "Family heirloom?" Delilah started, then shook her head. "I don't know my family, sir. This was with me when they found me at the orphanage years ago. The woman might be my mother, but—" She trailed off, closing the locket with gentle fingers. "I was abandoned. Never knew for certain." Nathaniel frowned, an odd unease stirring in his gut. Something about the girl's story, that fancy locket, it niggled at his memory like a splinter under skin. But the thought slipped away before he could grasp it. "Best get some sleep," he said gruffly. "Storm's settling in for the night." "Yes, sir. Thank you again for taking me in." She blew out her lamp, and the loft fell into darkness. Nathaniel lay in his own bed, listening to the winter wind. The girl's presence filled the cabin with an unfamiliar energy. Not unpleasant exactly, but unsettling. He'd lived alone since Sarah died, going on 8 years now. Having someone else under his roof, especially a young girl with secrets in her eyes. The snow fell steadily outside, sealing them in for the season. Come spring, he told himself, he'd sort this mess out properly. But for now they were stuck with each other. This odd pair, the crippled mountain man and the lost girl with the silver locket. Sleep was long in coming that night for both of them. Dawn crept over the San Juan Mountains, painting the snow-laden peaks in shades of rose and gold. Inside the cabin, Nathaniel Brandt sat at his rough-hewn table, one weathered hand wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. His steel-gray eyes kept drifting to the closed door of the small side room where the girl slept. The situation weighed on him like a load of wet timber. He'd ordered a capable woman through the Silver Creek Employment Office, someone strong enough to help with winter chores. Instead, they'd sent him this overweight child who looked like she'd never spent a day in the mountains. The floor creaked and Delilah emerged, her dark hair hastily braided. She'd already donned her faded calico dress, though her eyes were still heavy with sleep. Without a word, she moved to the iron stove and began arranging kindling. "No need for that," Nathaniel said gruffly. "You'll be heading back to Silver Creek today." Delilah's hands froze mid-task. "Sir?" Her voice wavered slightly. "I ordered help, not—" He gestured vaguely at her round frame. "You're not suited for mountain life. I'll saddle my mare after breakfast." The girl's shoulders hunched, but she didn't turn around. "I haven't any money for the return fare, Mr. Brandt, and nowhere to go if I did." "Surely there's—" "No, sir." She finally faced him, her chin trembling but lifted. "The employment office was my last chance. They said if this position didn't work out, She swallowed hard. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of desperate homesteaders, in women fleeing bad situations, in folk with nowhere left to turn. The mountains could be both refuge and executioner to such people. Delilah turned back to the stove, her movements clumsy as she tried to arrange the kindling. The wood clattered, refusing to stack properly. Nathaniel watched her struggle, fighting the urge to take over. "You're doing it wrong," he said finally. "Smaller pieces on bottom, like building a house. Need air between them." She nodded, adjusting the wood with shaking fingers. When she struck the match, the flame caught quickly, spreading through the careful arrangement. A small victory, but her face showed no pride, only relief at not failing. The morning wore on, and Nathaniel watched as Delilah moved through the cabin. She found the broom without being told, sweeping the hearth clean of ash and dust. Her movements were uncertain but thorough, as if trying to prove her worth through each careful stroke. By afternoon, Nathaniel had retreated to his workshop, the familiar smell of sawdust and leather helping to settle his thoughts. Through the window, he could see Delilah making trip after trip to the creek, hauling water in heavy buckets. Her dress hem was soaked and her face was flushed with exertion, but she didn't complain. Each time she passed, the buckets swayed with her awkward gait, spilling precious drops onto the snow. The sun was setting when Nathaniel finally returned inside. The cabin smelled of beans and cornbread, simple fare, but hot and filling. They ate in silence, the girl's red, chapped hands testament to her day's labor. After the dishes were cleared, Delilah settled near the fire with a torn quilt she'd found. Her stitches were small and even, her focus absolute as she worked the needle through the worn fabric. The firelight caught the silver chain around her neck, reminding Nathaniel of the locket she'd shown him the night before. "This ain't no place for comfort," he said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Winter up here kills the unprepared, comes quick and stays long. Even strong men have frozen in their own doorways, just trying to reach the woodpile in a blizzard." Delilah's hands stilled, but she didn't look up. "I understand, sir." "Do you? You're not built for this life. Too young, too—" He stopped, unwilling to name her obvious physical limitations. "I've survived worse than cold, Mr. Brandt." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that made him lean forward. "What do you mean by that?" Her hand flew to the locket, fingers closing around it protectively. The firelight caught tears in her eyes before she turned away. "I should get some rest. Morning comes early." She folded the quilt carefully, setting it aside before hurrying to her room. Nathaniel remained by the fire, listening to the pop and hiss of burning wood. The girl was right. He couldn't send her away, not with winter closing in. The pass would be dangerous now, and Silver Creek was no place for a young woman with empty pockets. Outside, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their yips and howls echoing off the mountainsides. Nathaniel had never minded the sound before, had even found comfort in it during his years alone. But tonight, the wild voices seemed to mock him, reminding him how deadly solitude could be in these heights. He thought of his wife, gone these 10 years. What would Mary have done with this girl? The answer came quickly enough. She'd have taken her in without question, would have seen past the awkward exterior to whatever hurt lay beneath. But Mary wasn't here. There was just him, his bad leg, and now this unexpected burden. He'd have to watch her every move, teach her everything about survival up here. The thought exhausted him. Rising with the aid of his cane, Nathaniel added another log to the fire. The flames caught quickly, sending shadows dancing across the ceiling beams. He'd ordered help and got in trouble instead. But something about the girl's quiet determination, her willingness to work despite obvious discomfort, had stirred memories he'd rather keep buried. He thought of another young woman years ago when he'd been riding scout for the army. She'd had that same look of desperate determination, trying to protect her child from men who saw her as less than human. He'd failed her then, letting rules and orders override what he knew was right. Nathaniel's grip tightened on his cane. The girl would stay, at least until spring thaw made the pass safe again. He didn't have to like it, but he'd do what needed doing. It was the only choice he could live with. In her room, he could hear Delilah's soft movements as she prepared for bed. The cabin creaked and settled around them, adjusting to the presence of two where there had been only one for so long. Outside, the coyotes continued their wild song, but now it seemed to carry a different message, a reminder that sometimes salvation and burden wore the same face. Morning arrived with a bitter chill that seemed to seep through the cabin's log walls. Nathaniel woke to the sound of creaking, Delilah struggling with the frozen door hinges as she tried to step outside. The frost had sealed the door shut tight as iron. "Put your back into it, girl," he called from his bed, wincing as he sat up. His leg always hurt worst in the morning cold. With a final heave, Delilah got the door open. Cold air rushed in, making the embers in the stove flicker. Nathaniel watched through the window as she made her way to the woodpile, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She picked up the axe and his frown deepened. The girl could barely lift the tool properly. She set a piece of wood on the stump and swung. The axe head barely bit into the wood. Again she tried, her round face flushed with effort, but the log remained stubbornly intact. Nathaniel grabbed his cane and pulled himself up with a grunt. He couldn't watch this any longer. Shuffling outside, he called out, "Stop before you hurt yourself." Delilah stepped back, hanging her head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brandt. I thought if I could get the kindling ready early." "Your heart's in the right place," he said, taking the axe from her hands. "But this needs doing proper." He positioned himself at the chopping block, grimacing as he shifted his weight to his good leg. The first swing sent pain shooting through his hip, but the log split cleanly. "You shouldn't have to," Delilah started, seeing his discomfort. "Been doing this longer than you've been alive," he cut her off, setting up another piece. Each stroke was agony, but he kept his face neutral. Better his hands than hers on the axe. Delilah gathered the split wood as it fell, stacking it carefully. When she bent to sweep up the scattered chips and bark, something glinted in the weak morning light. Her locket had slipped from her collar, swinging free. Before she noticed, the chain caught on her sleeve and snapped. The locket fell into the dirt and chips. Nathaniel was closer. He stooped, ignoring the protest from his leg, and picked it up. He meant to hand it right back, but something caught his eye. There, engraved on the brass case, was a distinctive crest. An eagle, wings spread wide, perched atop crossed pickaxes. The sight hit him like a physical blow. Years ago, before his accident, he'd worked briefly as a scout for Augustus Truesdale, one of Denver's wealthiest mine barons. The man's private offices had displayed that same eagle crest everywhere, on letterheads carved into wooden panels, even worked into the iron gates. But what struck Nathaniel cold was the memory of a particular newspaper article, one that had caused a sensation. Truesdale's only daughter, kidnapped, never found. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice sharper than intended. Delilah's eyes widened at his tone. She reached for the locket, but he held it just out of reach. "Please," she said. "It's all I have of my mother." "Your mother?" He studied her face carefully. "In Denver?" "I've never been to Denver," she said quickly, too quickly. "I was raised in orphanages, farm homes mostly. The locket was with me when they found me, that's all I know." Nathaniel turned the locket over in his hands. It was fine work, real silver despite the tarnish. Not the kind of thing usually found on abandoned children. "You're certain? Never lived in the city?" "Just farms," she insisted. "Please, Mr. Brandt, may I have it back?" Something in her voice, a tremor of real fear, made him relent. He handed over the locket, watching as she clutched it close. Her hands shook as she tried to fix the broken chain. "Here," he said gruffly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a leather cord he kept for repairs. "Use this for now." "Thank you," she whispered, threading the cord through the locket's loop. Her fingers trembled so badly she couldn't tie it. Nathaniel took it back with a sigh, knotting the cord securely. When he returned it, Delilah immediately slipped it over her head and tucked it beneath her collar, as if hiding it from his scrutiny. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. Nathaniel watched Delilah as she went about her tasks, seeing her with new eyes. Could she be Truesdale's lost daughter? The timing would be right. She'd be about 16 now. But if so, Why was she here, trying to work as a servant? And why deny knowing Denver? As evening fell, they sat in their usual places by the fire. Delilah held his old Bible, her finger marking a passage. It had become their routine. She would read aloud while he smoked his pipe, her clear voice making the familiar words sound fresh. "Would you like me to read, Mr. Brandt?" she asked hesitantly, breaking the long silence. He nodded, studying her face in the lamplight. She had Truesdale's high forehead, he thought, maybe something of his coloring. But where the mine baron was all hard angles and sharp pride, Delilah was soft, in body and manner both. As she read, Nathaniel's thoughts churned. If she truly was Truesdale's heir, she belonged in Denver, not here in his rough cabin. The mine baron had wealth, power, connections, everything a young girl should want. Yet something about Delilah's fear when he questioned her made him uneasy. What was she running from? The lamp flickered, casting shadows across the pages as Delilah read on, her voice steady despite the day's tension. Nathaniel felt the weight of his suspicion like a physical burden. This fragile peace they'd found, her quiet presence making his cabin feel like a home again, could be torn away if he was right. If Truesdale discovered his daughter was here. He watched her turn the page with careful fingers, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Nathaniel realized he didn't want to send her away. Not to Silver Creek, not to Denver, not anywhere. The thought surprised him, and he pushed it aside, discomfited by his own attachment. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. Winter was settling in for True now, and with it, secrets that could freeze the warmth growing between them as surely as morning frost had sealed the door. Snow drifted against the cabin walls, piling higher with each passing day. The world beyond their windows had turned white and silent, broken only by the occasional cry of a hunting hawk or the distant howl of wolves. Inside, life fell into steady rhythms as familiar as breathing. Delilah rose before dawn each morning, stoking the dying embers in the cook stove until flames licked at fresh kindling. The cast-iron pot of coffee was always brewing by the time Nathaniel's boots hit the plank floor. Neither spoke much in those early hours. They didn't need to. The quiet felt comfortable now, like a well-worn quilt. On this morning, Delilah worked cornmeal into a smooth batter, humming softly as she added the last precious eggs from their dwindling store. The goats would need tending soon. Their milk had grown thin in the cold months, but it was better than none at all. "Smells good," Nathaniel said from his chair by the fire where he was mending a pair of wool socks. Delilah's cheeks colored at the praise. "Just cornbread, Mr. Brandt. Nothing special." "Better than the hard tack I used to eat on the trail." He tested his needle against the sock's thick weave. "You've got a good hand with baking." She poured the batter into the greased skillet, careful not to splash. "Had to learn young. The farm wives I worked for, they expected it." The cornbread went into the oven, and Delilah wrapped herself in Nathaniel's old buffalo coat before heading out to the goat shed. The snow had drifted nearly to her knees in places. She followed the path they'd tramped down over days of back-and-forth trips, her breath clouding in the crystal air. The two nanny goats greeted her with soft bleats, pressing close for warmth. Delilah worked quickly, her fingers stiff as she stripped their udders. The routine was familiar now. Feed, water, milk, clean. When she finished, she tucked fresh straw around their hooves and made sure the door was latched tight against predators. Back inside, she found Nathaniel had set out the washtub near the stove. Her heart sank a little. Wash day was always hard in winter, but it needed doing. She heated pot after pot of water, then plunged her hands into the icy mix. The lye soap bit at her skin as she scrubbed shirts and underclothes against the washboard. "Here." Nathaniel's voice startled her. He held out a pair of worn leather gloves. "Protect your hands some, at least." Delilah took them gratefully, touched by his gruff thoughtfulness. The gloves were far too big, but they helped. She worked steadily, wringing each piece out before hanging it on the line strung across the cabin's rear corner. The wet clothes would freeze stiff as boards, but they'd dry eventually in the warm air near the ceiling. After lunch, Nathaniel beckoned her to follow him outside. "Time you learned proper wood splitting," he said, leading her to the chopping block. Can't have you swinging wild at those logs anymore." He positioned her hands on the axe handle, showing her how to stand. "Let the weight of the head do the work," he instructed. "Don't force it. Just guide it down center." Delilah's first few attempts went wide, but Nathaniel was patient. He adjusted her grip, demonstrated the motion again and again until she began to find the rhythm. By the time they finished, she had a neat pile of split logs to show for her effort. "You're learning," he said, and though his face remained stern, she caught a glint of approval in his eyes. That evening, after the dishes were cleared and the fire built up, they sat in their usual places, Nathaniel in his chair, Delilah on the low stool near the hearth. The flames painted everything in warm gold, making the cabin feel snug against the gathering dark outside. "Mr. Brandt?" Delilah's voice was barely above a whisper. "May I ask you something?" He glanced up from his whittling. "Suppose so." She twisted her hands in her lap. Did you ever marry?" The knife stilled in his fingers. For a long moment, there was only the pop and crackle of burning wood. Then Nathaniel set his carving aside, his weathered face softening with memory. "Yes," he said quietly. "Her name was Sarah." Delilah held very still, afraid any movement might stop him from continuing. "She loved this mountain," he went on, his voice distant. "Said it made her feel closer to heaven." His fingers traced the pattern on his chair's arm. "We had 10 good years together before the fever took her. She's buried in the meadow just below the ridge, where the columbines bloom in summer." "I'm sorry," Delilah whispered. "She sounds wonderful." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes fixed on the fire. "She was. At least," Delilah's voice caught, "at least she had someone to mourn her, to remember." She ducked her head, hands clutching her skirts. "No one's ever mourned for me. I don't even know if my own mother—" She broke off, unable to continue. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Way I see it, mourning's for them that's gone. You're here, ain't you? Living and breathing?" Delilah nodded, wiping her eyes quickly with her sleeve. "Then best thing to do is keep on living," he said gruffly. "Sarah taught me that much, at least." Several days later, they set out together to check the trap lines Nathaniel had set in the forest. The morning was bitter cold, their boots crunching through crusted snow. Nathaniel had shown Delilah how to set simple snares for rabbits, teaching her to look for their runs and feeding places. "See there?" He pointed to tracks in the snow. "Rabbit's been through recent. Might have something in the next trap." They worked their way along the line, finding 2 snares sprung but empty. The third held a plump snowshoe hare, its white fur blending with the drifts. Nathaniel showed Delilah how to reset each trap, his breath frosting in the air as he explained the proper tension for the wire. On their way back, crossing a patch of ice hidden beneath fresh snow, Nathaniel's bad leg betrayed him. His cane slipped, and he pitched forward with a sharp grunt of pain. Delilah lunged to catch him, her strong arms steadying his weight before he could fall. "Mr. Brandt!" The fear in her voice made him feel foolish. "Are you hurt?" "Just the knee," he ground out, teeth clenched against the familiar agony. Old injury acting up. Together they made their slow way back to the cabin, Delilah supporting him whenever his leg threatened to give way. By the time they reached home, Nathaniel's face was gray with pain, and sweat had frozen on his forehead despite the cold. That evening, Delilah insisted on tending to his swollen knee. "Mrs. Abernathy taught me about poultices," she explained, mixing dried herbs with hot water. "She was the kindest of the farm wives I worked for, said everyone should know healing." Nathaniel watched, surprised, as she worked with quiet confidence. Her hands were gentle but sure as she wrapped the hot compress around his knee, securing it with strips torn from an old sheet. The familiar scent of arnica rose from the bandage. "Better?" she asked anxiously. He had to admit it was. The heat seemed to sink deep into the joint, easing the worst of the ache. "You've got healing hands," he said. "Like Sarah did." Delilah's smile lit her whole face, and for a moment Nathaniel forgot about the pain entirely. As the weeks passed, the silence between them thawed like spring ice, breaking into conversations that flowed more freely each day. Delilah told him stories of the farms where she'd worked, some kind, some cruel. Nathaniel shared tales of his scouting days, carefully editing out the darker parts. They developed small rituals. Every evening, Delilah would read aloud from the Bible while Nathaniel smoked his pipe. On Sundays, they'd share their best meal of the week, usually rabbit stew with dumplings. Sometimes Nathaniel would take out his harmonica and play old trail songs, and Delilah would hum along, her clear voice joining his rough one. But in quiet moments, when Nathaniel caught sight of the locket hanging at Delilah's throat, the weight of his suspicion pressed down like a physical thing. He watched her moving about the cabin, humming as she kneaded bread, laughing at the antics of the goat kids, reading by lamplight with such concentration, and wondered how to reconcile this gentle girl with the lost daughter of Augustus Truesdale. The mine baron had been a hard man, driven by ambition and pride. Would he welcome this child, so different from himself? Or would finding her only bring more pain to a girl who'd already known too much of it? The questions haunted Nathaniel, but he kept them locked behind his teeth, unwilling to break the fragile trust they'd built. One evening, as Delilah dozed in her chair by the fire, the locket had slipped free of her collar. The firelight caught the eagle crest, making it seem to move. Nathaniel studied her peaceful face, seeing now the subtle marks of gentle breeding that poverty and hard work hadn't quite erased. The fine bones of her wrists, the natural grace of her movements, the way she held herself even when tired. She belonged to two worlds, he realized, born to wealth but raised in hardship. The thought made his chest ache with an unfamiliar protectiveness. Whatever the truth of her past, she was here now, making his lonely cabin feel like home again. For the moment, perhaps that was enough. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountain in white silence. Inside, the fire crackled low, and Delilah's breathing was soft and even. Nathaniel pulled a blanket over her sleeping form, then returned to his chair, content to watch over her rest while winter deepened around their shared sanctuary. The full moon hung like a silver lantern above the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. Inside the cabin, Nathaniel dozed in his chair by the dying fire, his worn Bible open on his lap. Delilah had already retired to her small room, the soft sound of her breathing barely audible through the thin wall. A sharp bleat from the goat pen jerked Nathaniel awake. He sat up straight, listening intently. Another nervous cry rang out, followed by the scraping of hooves against wooden planks. Something was wrong. Nathaniel grabbed his rifle from its peg by the door, checking that it was loaded. The familiar weight of the old Winchester settled into his hands as he eased the cabin door open, careful not to let it creak. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and frost. His bad knee protested as he limped across the yard, boots crunching in the crusty snow. The moonlight was bright enough to cast his shadow ahead of him as he approached the corral. The goats huddled together in one corner of their shelter, eyes wide with fear. Fresh tracks circled the pen, huge paw prints pressed deep into the snow. Nathaniel's heart quickened. Mountain lion. The beast must have caught the scent of the goats and decided to investigate. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the corral. Nathaniel raised his rifle, scanning the tree line. There, two eyes reflected the moonlight, glowing like amber coals. The big cat crouched at the edge of the timber, its tawny coat almost invisible against the winter-bare branches. Nathaniel took careful aim. He didn't want to kill the creature if he didn't have to. Lions were part of the mountain's natural order. A warning shot should be enough to send it running. He squeezed the trigger. The firing pin clicked, but nothing happened. Nathaniel worked the lever frantically, trying to chamber another round, but the mechanism was frozen stiff. The old rifle had chosen the worst possible moment to jam. The mountain lion's muscles bunched, preparing to spring. Nathaniel reached for his knife, knowing it would be useless against those claws and teeth. The goats bleated in terror. Suddenly, the night exploded with noise. Delilah burst from the cabin wearing only her nightdress and shawl, wielding one of the big iron cooking pans. She banged it furiously with a wooden spoon, the sound echoing off the mountainside like thunder. "Get away," she shouted, her voice sharp with fear but determined. Leave them be. The lion's ears flattened against its head at the unexpected racket. It took a step back, confused by this new threat. Delilah advanced, still beating the pan. Go on. Get. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed strong. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. The familiar psalm rang out between clangs of the pan. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The big cat decided this strange, noisy creature wasn't worth the trouble. With fluid grace, it turned and melted into the forest, leaving only tracks in the snow as evidence it had ever been there. Nathaniel lowered his useless rifle, heart pounding. Girl, have you lost your mind? That cat could have killed you. Delilah's courage seemed to drain away now that the danger had passed. The pan slipped from her trembling fingers, landing with a dull thud in the snow. I heard the goats crying, she stammered. And then the shot. I thought you might need help. Running out here half-dressed, armed with nothing but a pot and a spoon? Nathaniel's voice was gruff with lingering fear. That was pure foolishness. Tears welled in Delilah's eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Brandt, I couldn't bear to think of the goats being hurt. Or you. Nathaniel's expression softened. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shivering shoulders. Come on, let's get you inside before you freeze. Back in the cabin, Nathaniel built up the fire while Delilah made hot tea with trembling hands. When she handed him a steaming cup, he cleared his throat awkwardly. What you did out there, he said slowly. It was reckless, mind you. But it was also brave. Saved the goats, likely as not. Maybe saved me too, with my rifle jammed up like it was. Color bloomed in Delilah's cheeks at the praise. Really? He nodded. Reckon I owe you my thanks. Though don't go making a habit of charging at mountain lions, you hear? A small smile tugged at her lips. No, sir, I won't. Neither of them slept much that night, too keyed up from the excitement. They sat by the fire, drinking tea and talking in low voices until the eastern sky began to lighten. As soon as dawn broke, they went out to examine the corral. The lion's tracks were still clearly visible in the snow, showing how it had circled the pen multiple times, testing for weakness. Fence needs strengthening, Nathaniel declared. Cat might come back. Now it knows the goats are here. They spent the morning reinforcing the corral. Nathaniel showed Delilah how to weave branches between the posts to create a tighter barrier, his hands guiding hers with firm patience as she learned the technique. Like this, she asked, tucking a sturdy pine bough into place. That's the way, he approved. Now bind it tight with the rawhide, same as I showed you. Delilah's tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated on the task, her fingers growing more confident with each knot she tied. By midday, they had woven a solid wall of branches around the lower half of the pen, high enough to discourage any prowling predators. Reckon that'll hold, Nathaniel said, stepping back to survey their work. You did good, girl. Delilah beamed at the praise, her round cheeks flushed with cold and pleasure. The goats seemed to approve as well, butting their heads affectionately against her legs as she scattered fresh hay in their shelter. That evening, Delilah outdid herself with supper, making dumplings to go with the rabbit stew, and even managing to produce a small apple cake from their dwindling store of preserved fruit. The warm, spicy scent filled the cabin, making it feel more like a home than it had in years. As they ate, Nathaniel noticed how different she seemed from the frightened girl who had arrived on his doorstep months ago. She laughed more freely now, her eyes bright with confidence born of knowing she was truly useful. The burden of unwantedness that had weighed so heavily on her shoulders seemed lighter, as if purpose and acceptance had helped her stand straighter. She belonged here, he realized with sudden clarity. Belonged in this cabin with its rough-hewn beams and smoky hearth. Belonged caring for the animals and keeping house with quiet competence. Belonged reading scripture by lamplight and singing old hymns as she worked. But even as the thought formed, his eyes fell on the locket hanging at her throat. The eagle crest caught the firelight, a constant reminder of the secret he carried. Somewhere in Denver, a powerful man might still be searching for his lost daughter. The knowledge lay between them like a shadow, as if destiny itself prowled the edges of their fragile peace, waiting to pounce like the mountain lion. Delilah caught him staring and touched the locket self-consciously. "Is something wrong, Mr. Brandt?" Nathaniel shook his head, pushing aside his troubled thoughts. "No, child. Just thinking how good that cake smells." She smiled and cut him an extra-large piece, clearly pleased by his appreciation. As she served it, humming softly under her breath, Nathaniel tried to focus on the present moment, the warmth of the fire, the sweetness of the cake, the comfortable companionship they had built. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick flakes swirling in the lamplight that spilled from the cabin windows. The goats were safe in their reinforced pen, and his home was filled with the sound of Delilah's gentle laughter. For now, Nathaniel decided that would have to be enough. The January wind howled like a wounded beast, rattling the cabin's shutters. Nathaniel struggled against it, hauling water from the creek. His bad leg protested each step through knee-deep snow. The bucket's metal handle bit into his frozen fingers. "Last trip," he muttered, though his chest felt tight and strange. Sweat dampened his collar despite the biting cold. Something wasn't right. Inside, Delilah looked up from kneading bread dough, her face creasing with worry. "Mr. Brandt, you're white as a sheet." The room tilted sideways. Nathaniel tried to set down the water bucket but missed, spilling it across the plank floor. His legs gave way. "Mr. Brandt!" Delilah rushed to catch him, but his weight was too much. They both went down, though she managed to break his fall somewhat. "Oh Lord, you're burning up." Through blurring vision, Nathaniel saw her frightened face swim above him. "Just need rest a spell," he mumbled. "We need to get you to bed right now." Delilah's voice shook, but her hands were steady as she helped him struggle to his feet. Together, they stumbled to his narrow bunk. By the time she got his boots off, Nathaniel was shivering violently. Delilah piled every blanket they had onto him, but still his teeth chattered. "Have to check the goats," he protested weakly. "They're fine, don't you worry about anything but getting well." Delilah's round face was set with determination as she hung the big iron kettle over the fire. "I'll take care of everything." The afternoon passed in a haze of fever dreams. Nathaniel drifted in and out of consciousness, aware sometimes of Delilah's cool hands pressing wet cloths to his forehead, her voice murmuring prayers. As evening drew on, the fever rose higher. Nathaniel thrashed against the blankets, lost in memories. "Sarah," he called out. "Sarah, wait for me." His wife's face floated before him, young and beautiful as the day they wed. But then it changed, became another woman's face, darker, with eyes full of terror. "No, no, don't shoot." He was back there that terrible day with the railroad crew, the Comanche woman clutching her baby, backing away from the soldiers' rifles. "They're innocent. Stand down." "Mr. Brandt, please." Delilah's voice broke through briefly. She was fighting to keep him in bed as he tried to rise. "You're safe here. It's just the fever talking." But he was lost again, reliving that moment when the shots rang out. The woman fell, her blood staining the prairie grass. The baby's cries stopped too soon. "My fault," Nathaniel moaned. "Should have stopped them. My fault." "Shh." Delilah bathed his face with trembling hands. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." Her voice caught on a sob, but she forced herself to continue the psalm. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Through the long night hours, Delilah kept her vigil. When the fire burned low, she added logs. When the kettle cooled, she reheated it. Her voice grew hoarse from praying, but she didn't stop. "Please, Lord," she whispered, gripping her mother's locket tight. "Please don't take him. He's all I have." Nathaniel's fevered muttering continued. Names and places tumbled from his lips. Sarah, his lost wife. Walking Bear, who'd saved his life once. The Comanche woman whose name he never knew. The baby he couldn't protect. Delilah wiped tears from her cheeks as she listened to his pain spill out. Such a burden of guilt he'd carried alone all these years. No wonder he'd hidden himself away on this mountain. "The Lord is merciful and gracious," she read from the Bible in her lap, her voice rough with exhaustion, "slow to anger and plenteous in mercy." Dawn was breaking when Nathaniel's fever finally broke. The terrible shivers eased, and his breathing grew steady. Delilah, slumped on her stool beside the bed, had fallen into an uneasy doze, the Bible still open across her knees. The first rays of sun streamed through the window, catching on her dark hair. Nathaniel blinked, struggling to focus. His body ached as if he'd been beaten, but his mind was clear again. He studied Delilah's sleeping face, the dark circles under her eyes, the tear tracks on her cheeks. She'd stayed with him through the whole night, he realized. This girl he'd so resented at first had fought to keep him alive. "Delilah," he said softly. She startled awake, nearly dropping the Bible. "Mr. Brandt, how do you feel? Your fever's broken, thank the Lord." Her hands fluttered anxiously. "Do you need water? Another blanket?" "I'm all right, child." His voice was weak, but he managed a small smile. "Thanks to you, I reckon." Color rose in her cheeks. "I was so scared. You were calling out, fighting something terrible in your dreams." Nathaniel's smile faded as fragments of memory returned, the things he'd revealed in his delirium. Shame twisted in his gut. "You heard all that, did you?" Delilah nodded slowly. About your wife, and the woman with the baby." She hesitated. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter to bear." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, looking at his gnarled hands on the blanket. "Sarah, my wife, she died of fever, like what nearly took me. Nothing I could do but watch her slip away." He drew a shaking breath. "After that, I took work scouting for the railroad, trying to outrun my grief, I suppose." Delilah settled back on her stool, listening intently as he continued. "One day we came upon a small group of Comanche, a woman and her baby separated from their band. The soldiers were spoiling for a fight." His voice grew bitter. "I tried to stop them, said they were no threat, but they wouldn't listen to a scout, shot them down like animals." "Oh, Mr. Brandt," Delilah's eyes brimmed with tears. "Been carrying that guilt ever since, knowing I could have done more, should have done more." He looked away. "That's why I came up here. Figured I didn't deserve to be around decent folks anymore." "No," Delilah's voice was fierce. "That wasn't your fault. You tried to save them. Trying wasn't enough, they died all the same. But you carry them in your heart still. Honor their memory with your grief." Delilah touched his hand gently. "The Lord knows you did what you could. His mercy is bigger than any regret." "Mercy?" Nathaniel's laugh was harsh. "What do you know of mercy, girl? You're too young to understand such things." "I know what it is to need mercy," she said quietly. "To be unwanted, cast aside. But I also know that love is stronger than pain. That grace finds us even when we think we don't deserve it." She spoke with such conviction that Nathaniel found himself wanting to believe her. Looking at her earnest face, he saw suddenly how much she'd changed from the frightened girl who'd arrived months ago. Or maybe he was the one who'd changed, seeing her true worth instead of just her circumstances. "When did you get so wise?" he asked gruffly, trying to hide how moved he was. Delilah smiled through her tears. "I had a good teacher, a grumpy old mountain man who showed me I could be more than what others said I was." Nathaniel had to clear his throat before he could speak. "Reckon we both had some learning to do." Outside, the morning sun struck the snow-covered peaks, making them glitter like diamond dust. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean and bright, as if heaven itself had heard Delilah's desperate prayers through the night. The girl who had arrived as an unwanted burden had become his lifeline in loneliness. Watching her bustle around the cabin, heating broth and straightening blankets, Nathaniel felt something shift inside his heart. The walls he'd built around himself were crumbling, brought down not by force but by simple, steadfast kindness. "You need to rest more," Delilah insisted, bringing him a cup of steaming broth. "Get your strength back." "Yes, ma'am," he said meekly, and was rewarded with her startled laugh. As he sipped the broth, Nathaniel studied her face. The trust between them felt different now, deeper. They had shared their wounds, and in doing so found healing neither had expected. The sunlight streamed through the window, warming the cabin's wooden walls. In its glow, Delilah hummed an old hymn as she worked, her voice clear and sweet. The sound wrapped around Nathaniel like a blanket, chasing away the last shadows of his fever dreams. The December days grew shorter, but warmth and light filled the mountain cabin. Pine boughs decorated the rough-hewn beams, their fresh scent mingling with the aroma of cornbread baking in the iron stove. Delilah had gathered the branches herself, determined to bring Christmas cheer to their humble home. Nathaniel sat at the wooden table, a string of cranberries stretched between his weathered hands. His bad leg was propped on a stool, but the pain didn't dim his smile as he watched Delilah thread another bright berry onto the string. "Never thought I'd be stringing cranberries again," he said, carefully pushing his needle through the firm red skin of a berry. "Sarah used to love making these garlands." "Did you celebrate Christmas together here?" Delilah asked softly, glancing around the cabin. "2 seasons before the fever took her." His voice grew distant, but then he brightened. She'd have liked seeing the cabin dressed up proper again. They worked in companionable silence, the fire crackling and popping in the hearth. Outside, heavy snow fell, wrapping their mountain world in hushed white. The afternoon light faded early, and Delilah lit the oil lamp, its warm glow casting dancing shadows on the log walls. As evening deepened into Christmas Eve, they finished their simple supper of venison stew and fresh cornbread. Delilah cleared the dishes while Nathaniel added another log to the fire. The flames leaped higher, filling the cabin with golden light. "Would you read the Christmas story?" Nathaniel asked, settling into his chair. "From Luke?" Delilah's face brightened. She retrieved the worn Bible from its shelf, handling it with reverent care. The pages fell open easily to the familiar passage as she sat in the circle of firelight. "And it came to pass in those days," she began, her clear voice steady and sweet, "that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus, that all the world should be taxed." Nathaniel closed his eyes, letting the ancient words wash over him. How many years had it been since anyone had read scripture aloud in this cabin? The girl's voice carried such genuine faith, such simple joy in the telling. When she finished reading, Delilah looked up to find Nathaniel watching her with an odd expression. He reached beneath his chair and pulled out a small wrapped package. "Got something for you," he said gruffly, extending it toward her. Delilah's hands trembled as she took the package. "For me?" Her voice quavered. "But I didn't expect—" "Go on, open it." She carefully unwrapped the cloth to reveal a wooden comb, beautifully carved with a pattern of mountain wildflowers. Delilah's eyes filled with tears as she traced the delicate designs with her finger. "No one." She had to stop, swallowing hard. "No one has ever given me a Christmas gift before." The words hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. He thought of all the Christmases this child must have endured in orphanages and poor farms, watching other children receive presents while she went without. Something fierce and protective stirred in his heart. "Well, now someone has," he said gruffly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Delilah clutched the comb to her chest, tears spilling down her round cheeks. "It's beautiful. Did you make it yourself?" Nathaniel nodded. "Worked on it nights after you'd gone to bed. Reckoned every girl should have something pretty of her own." Delilah's smile through her tears was like sunrise breaking through clouds. She began humming "Silent Night," her voice growing stronger as Nathaniel joined in. Soon they were singing other carols together, their voices rising and falling in the firelit cabin while snow fell silently outside. The evening passed in a golden haze of warmth and joy. Delilah told stories she remembered from the kind priest who visited the orphanage at Christmas. Nathaniel shared memories of holiday celebrations from his own childhood back east. Their laughter filled the small room, driving back the shadows of loneliness that had haunted them both for so long. Looking at her animated face in the firelight, Nathaniel felt his heart swell with affection. She wasn't the burden he'd first considered her to be. Somehow, without his noticing, she had become as dear to him as a daughter. He could see now how empty the cabin would feel without her presence, without her gentle faith, her quiet strength, her unfailing kindness. But then the firelight caught the golden gleam of her locket, and guilt stirred in Nathaniel's chest. The crest on that locket weighed on his conscience, the eagle and crossed pickaxes that tied Delilah to a wealthy family in Denver. Every day he didn't tell her the truth felt like another small betrayal. Yet looking at her peaceful face as she hummed carols, he couldn't bring himself to shatter this moment. Not on Christmas Eve, when she had finally found a measure of belonging. The truth would keep until after the holy day had passed. They sat together long into the night, while the fire burned low and snow continued to fall outside their windows. For this one shining evening, their past griefs and future uncertainties fell away. They were simply father and daughter in spirit, bound by something deeper than blood, the love that grows between lonely hearts who find each other. When Delilah finally rose to bank the fire for the night, she paused beside Nathaniel's chair. Shyly, she bent and kissed his weathered cheek. "Merry Christmas," she whispered, "and thank you for everything." Nathaniel patted her hand, his throat too tight for words. He watched her disappear behind the curtain to her small room, the carved comb clutched carefully in her hands. The cabin settled into peaceful silence, broken only by the soft crackle of embers. Outside, the snow had stopped, and moonlight sparkled on the pristine white blanket covering their mountain world. Peace on earth, Nathaniel thought, remembering the words Delilah had read. For this one blessed night, at least, they had found it. January brought fierce winds that howled down from the peaks, rattling the cabin's shutters like skeletal fingers. Inside, the steady rhythm of Nathaniel's whetstone against steel filled the air as he sharpened his axe. The familiar motion soothed him, even as memories stirred by recent fever dreams gnawed at his conscience. Delilah sat nearby in her usual spot by the fire, mending a torn shirt. The lamplight caught the silver thread of her needle as it dipped and rose through the fabric. She had grown more confident in these winter months, no longer startling at every creak of the settling logs or gust of wind against the walls. "Mr. Brandt." Her voice was hesitant but steady. "When you were sick with fever, you called out some names." Nathaniel's hands stilled on the whetstone. The scraping silence felt heavy as storm clouds. "You mentioned Sarah, your wife," Delilah continued softly. "But there were others too. A woman and a baby." The axe handle felt rough under Nathaniel's calloused palm. He stared into the fire, seeing other flames from long ago. The weight of unspoken guilt pressed down on his shoulders like wet snow. "You don't have to tell me," Delilah added quickly. "I just thought, sometimes talking helps ease the burden." Nathaniel drew a deep breath that shuddered in his chest. The girl had shared her own hurts with him. Perhaps it was time to trust her with his. "It was back in '68, he began, his voice rough as bark. "I was scouting for the railroad then, mapping routes through Comanche territory." He set the axe aside, his hands restless in his lap. "There was this woman, Running Deer, they called her. She'd help translate sometimes, her and her little one." Delilah's needle paused mid-stitch, her full attention on his words. "One morning, Army patrol rode through without warning. Said they had orders to clear the area." His jaw clenched at the memory. "I tried to explain she was friendly, that she helped us. But they wouldn't listen. Everything happened so fast." The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines like a spirit crying. "She ran with her baby trying to reach the river. I should have done more, should have stopped them somehow." His voice cracked. "By the time I got there, the current had already taken them both." Delilah set aside her mending and moved to kneel beside his chair. Her round face was etched with compassion. "The shame of it." Nathaniel's words came harder now. "Not being able to protect them. It's followed me all these years. Some nights I still hear that baby crying." "But you tried," Delilah said softly. "You wanted to help them." "Trying wasn't enough." He shook his head. "2 innocent lives lost because I didn't act faster, didn't do more." "Like you tried to help me?" Her question was gentle but direct. When I showed up here, unexpected and unwanted, you could have turned me away. Left me to freeze or worse. But you didn't. That was different. Was it? Delilah's hand found his, warm and steady. You showed mercy when no one else would. Just like you tried to show mercy then. Nathaniel stared at their joined hands, his weathered and work-roughened, hers soft despite the calluses earned this winter. God's forgiveness is wider than all our failures, she continued, her voice rich with conviction. Wide enough for what happened then, and wide enough for whatever weighs on us now. The words struck deep, like spring thaw breaking river ice. Nathaniel felt moisture gather in his eyes and blinked hard. When did you get so wise, girl? A small smile touched her lips. The priests at St. Mary's taught us that grace is God's greatest gift, that no sin is beyond his mercy if we're truly sorry. She squeezed his hand. I believe that includes whatever happened in the past. Nathaniel's throat tightened. He wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that forgiveness could cover even his darkest failures. But the weight of another secret pressed against his conscience. The truth about her locket, about who she might really be. The moment stretched between them, full of things unsaid. Finally, Nathaniel cleared his throat. Much obliged for listening, he said gruffly. Not many I've told about that day. Thank you for trusting me with it. Delilah rose and moved to the kitchen area, where dough sat rising in a bowl. Would you like some fresh bread for supper? I thought I'd try adding some dried berries this time. The familiar domestic sounds filled the cabin as she began kneading the dough. Her quiet humming drifted with the scent of yeast and wood smoke, a hymn he recognized from their Christmas celebration. Nathaniel watched her work, seeing how naturally she moved in this space that had once felt so empty. In these months, she had carved out a place for herself here, not just in the daily tasks of survival, but in his heart as well. She had become the daughter he never had, filling his lonely cabin with gentle faith and unfailing kindness. Even her struggles with simple chores showed a determination that stirred his pride. But that same paternal affection now fed his fear. What would happen when spring came, when the truth about her family could no longer be hidden? The crest on her locket was like a brand, marking her for another life far from these mountains. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the peaks, heavy with snow yet to fall. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters with renewed force. Nathaniel felt the storm's restless energy echo in his bones. Change was coming, as surely as spring would follow winter. Delilah continued kneading the bread dough, her movements steady and sure. Her soft humming filled the cabin with peace, even as Nathaniel's heart ached with the weight of his unspoken knowledge. For now, at least, they had this moment, this quiet evening wrapped in warmth and trust while the January storm raged beyond their walls. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn beams. Outside, the wind's voice rose and fell like distant wolves howling. But inside their small sanctuary, Nathaniel and Delilah moved through their evening routine, bound together by something deeper than blood. The love of two lonely souls who had found grace in each other's presence. As Delilah shaped the dough into loaves, flour dusting her capable hands, Nathaniel silently prayed that whatever spring might bring, this bond between them would somehow survive the thaw. The storm clouds gathering over the mountains seemed to hold their breath, as if waiting to see how fate would answer that prayer. The late February sun broke through weeks of gray, turning the snow-laden valley into a sea of blinding white. Nathaniel stood at his cabin window, watching ice drip from the eaves in steady rhythm. The sudden warmth felt like nature's promise of spring, though winter still held the high country in its grip. Inside, Delilah hummed as she worked at the table, carefully copying Bible verses into the small notebook he'd given her. Her penmanship had improved over the winter months, each letter formed with deliberate care. The scratch of her pencil mingled with the tap of melting snow, creating a peaceful melody. The distant thunder of hoofbeats shattered that peace. Nathaniel's hand tightened on his cane. In these mountains, unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. He limped to the door, his bad leg protesting the quick movement. Stay inside, he told Delilah, who had risen from her chair with worry creasing her brow. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. Nathaniel recognized Deputy Harrison Keene's weathered face beneath his broad-brimmed hat. The other 2 men wore city clothes beneath their heavy coats, Denver lawmen by the look of them. The deputy raised his hand in greeting as they dismounted. "Morning, Brant?" "Deputy." Nathaniel's voice was gruff. "Long ride from Silver Creek. Trail's starting to open up." Keene stomped snow from his boots. "These gentlemen rode up from Denver soon as the pass cleared enough." He gestured to his companions, Marshal Cooper and Deputy Marshal Williams. The Denver men nodded curtly. The marshal pulled a leather document case from his saddlebag. "What's your business here?" Nathaniel asked, though dread was already coiling in his gut. "Matter of some delicacy." Keene's eyes flicked to the cabin window. "Might be better to discuss it inside." Nathaniel wanted to refuse, to send them away before they could shatter the life he and Delilah had built, but he knew that wasn't possible. The law had come calling, and it wouldn't leave empty-handed. "Come in, then." He stepped back, leaning heavily on his cane. Delilah stood near the fireplace, her face pale as fresh snow. The 3 lawmen removed their hats as they entered, tracking melting slush across the clean-swept floor. Marshal Cooper withdrew several papers from his case, unfolding them with careful precision. An official seal caught the firelight, a familiar crest of an eagle perched on crossed pickaxes. "We're here on behalf of Augustus Truesdale," the marshal announced, "regarding his missing daughter." Delilah's hand flew to the locket at her throat. Her eyes went wide with sudden understanding. "Mr. Truesdale has been searching for his child for nearly 10 years, Cooper continued. When word reached Denver about a young woman matching the description, he paused, studying Delilah's face. "The resemblance to her mother is remarkable." "No." Delilah's voice quavered. "You're mistaken. I'm just an orphan. Nobody's daughter." "The locket you wear suggests otherwise." Deputy Williams spoke for the first time. "That's the Truesdale family crest." Nathaniel watched helplessly as Delilah's fingers trembled over the brass case that had hung around her neck all these months. The truth he'd suspected now stood revealed, sharp as a blade. "Mr. Truesdale has provided sworn statements and documentation." Cooper spread the papers on the table. "Birth records, witness accounts of the kidnapping, detailed descriptions. By law, as her father and legal guardian, he has the right to reclaim his daughter." "I won't go." Delilah backed away, shaking her head. "This is my home now. Nathaniel." She looked to him pleadingly. "Tell them I belong here." The words stuck in Nathaniel's throat like thorns. Everything in him wanted to protect her, to fight for the family they'd forged in these winter months. But he had no legal claim, no right to keep her from her bloodkin. "Now, miss," Keene said gently, "Mr. Truesdale is waiting in Denver. He's prepared a proper home for you with all the comforts a young lady should have." "I don't want comforts." Delilah's voice rose with desperation. "I want to stay here with my father." The word hung in the air like frost. Nathaniel's heart clenched at hearing her claim him so boldly, even as he knew it couldn't last. "Your real father has been searching for you since you were stolen from your nursery," Cooper said firmly. "He's never stopped hoping to find you." "If he's my father, where was he all these years?" Delilah demanded. "Where was he when I was hungry and cold and alone? Nathaniel took me in when no one else would. He taught me to be strong, to have faith. He's more family than any rich man in Denver." "The law is clear on this matter." Cooper's voice held no room for argument. "As a minor, you must be returned to your legal guardian." Nathaniel found his voice at last. "Surely there's some way—" He struggled to keep his tone level. "The girl's nearly 17, old enough to have some say in her future." "Not according to the law." Cooper shook his head. "Mr. Truesdale's claim is legally binding until she comes of age. Please." Delilah's eyes brimmed with tears. "Please don't make me go." The marshal nodded to his deputy. "Best get this over with quickly." Williams stepped forward, reaching for Delilah's arm. She jerked away, darting behind Nathaniel. "Don't touch her." Nathaniel's grip whitened on his cane. "Now, Brant," Keen warned, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." "She's not a criminal to be hauled away." Nathaniel's voice rose. "She's a child who's found a home here. A home that's not rightfully hers." Cooper's patience was wearing thin. "Step aside, Mr. Brant. Don't force us to remove you." Delilah clutched Nathaniel's arm. "Please don't let them take me." The helplessness nearly choked him. What could he do against the law, against armed men with official papers? His leg would barely let him stand, let alone fight. "Let me at least gather my things," Delilah pleaded. Cooper hesitated, then nodded. "Make it quick." Delilah rushed to her small corner, hands shaking as she stuffed clothes and her precious notebook into a bundle. The brass locket gleamed at her throat, now a chain binding her to another life. "Time to go, miss." Williams took her arm firmly but not unkindly. Delilah turned to Nathaniel, tears streaming down her face. "I'll find a way back," she whispered fiercely. "I promise." He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe this wasn't truly goodbye. But the law stood between them now, as impassable as the mountain peaks. "God be with you, child." His voice broke on the words. The deputy helped her mount one of the horses. She looked so small against the winter sky, her face wet with tears as she stared back at the cabin that had been her sanctuary. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane as the riders turned their horses toward the valley. Delilah's sobs carried back to him on the wind until distance swallowed the sound. He watched until they disappeared into the white expanse below, taking with them the light and warmth that had filled his home these past months. The silence pressed in, heavy as a burial shroud. His bad leg gave out as he stumbled to the hearth. Kneeling there, where she had prayed through his fever night, he tried to form words of his own. But grief closed his throat, leaving only raw, wordless pain. The fire had burned low, casting weak shadows in the suddenly empty cabin. Outside, the sun continued to shine on the melting snow, oblivious to how thoroughly it had just destroyed the fragile family that had sheltered here through the long winter nights. The cabin felt like a tomb. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, staring at the empty chair where Delilah used to sit and read from his worn Bible. Her absence pressed against his chest like a physical weight. 3 days had passed since the riders took her, but each hour stretched endless as a desert. He limped to the hearth, stirring cold ashes with his cane. The fire needed feeding, but his hands remained still. What was the point? The warmth had gone out of the place the moment Delilah left. The morning routine that once brought comfort now felt hollow. He fed the goats mechanically, their bleating a poor substitute for Delilah's gentle humming. The water bucket sat empty. He couldn't bear to haul it alone, remembering how she'd insisted on helping despite his protests. Even the wooden comb he'd carved her still lay on the shelf, forgotten in the chaos of her departure. At night, sleep eluded him. He tossed in his bunk, haunted by the image of her tear-streaked face as the riders led her away. In fleeting dreams, he heard her laughter echoing through the cabin, only to wake with a crushing ache in his chest. The silence that followed was deafening. "Lord," he whispered into the darkness, "keep her safe." But the prayers felt inadequate against the weight of his failure to protect her. Days blurred together. He went through the motions of living, mending fences, patching the roof where winter storms had loosened shingles, checking trap lines that came up empty. Every task reminded him of Delilah's absence. The fresh bread she'd learned to bake, the neat stitches she'd used to repair his shirts, the way she'd remembered exactly how he liked his coffee. On the 5th day, Thomas Weber rode up from the valley, bringing supplies and news. Nathaniel's heart clenched at the sight of another rider, but he forced himself to greet his neighbor. "Heard talk from Denver," Weber said, helping unload salt pork and coffee. "That girl they took from here, she's caused quite a stir in society circles." Nathaniel's hand stilled on a flour sack. What kind of stir? Augustus Truesdale's been showing her off at every gathering, parading his miracle. Lost daughter returned after all these years. Weber shook his head. "Papers are full of it, though folks whisper she ain't exactly what he expected. Say she's too common, too plain for his taste, but blood's blood, I reckon." The flour sack hit the floor with a thud. Nathaniel gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He could picture Delilah, shy and uncertain, thrust into a world of silk dresses and sharp judgments. How many times had she confessed her fears of never belonging anywhere? "She ain't some prize mare to be displayed," he growled. Weber studied him carefully. "Heard she's not taking to it well. Truesdale's got her fitted for fancy dresses, hired tutors to teach her proper manners. But word is she barely speaks, just sits in that mansion like a bird in a gilded cage." Each word drove deeper into Nathaniel's heart. He remembered Delilah's quiet joy tending the goats, her pride in learning to split kindling properly. The simple Christmas they'd shared, when her eyes shone brighter than any society jewels at the gift of a hand-carved comb. "That life will kill her spirit," he muttered. "Ain't our place to judge," Weber said, but his expression was sympathetic. "Law's clear on where she belongs." After Weber rode away, Nathaniel paced the cabin like a caged animal. The neighbor's words echoed in his mind, painting pictures he couldn't bear. Delilah trapped in corsets and conformity, her gentle soul withering under her father's rigid expectations. He remembered her tears the night she arrived, confessing she'd never known real kindness. How she'd gradually bloomed here in the cabin, finding purpose in honest work and simple pleasures. The way she'd faced down a mountain lion to protect the goats, showing more courage than any society belle. Sleep eluded him completely that night. He lay awake, staring at the rough-hewn beams, remembering how she'd nursed him through fever without complaint. Her prayers had been simple, but sincere, her faith as pure as mountain spring water. What would become of that faith in Truesdale's mansion, where wealth was God and appearance everything? Dawn found him already up, his decision crystallizing like frost on the windowpane. The law might say Delilah belonged to Truesdale by blood, but Nathaniel knew better. She belonged where she could be herself, where her gentle spirit could flourish. His hands moved with purpose now, packing provisions into saddlebags. Hard bread, dried meat, coffee, an extra blanket. He strapped his rifle to the saddle of his old mare, checking the ammunition carefully. The mountain passes would still be treacherous, but he knew every trail. The goats bleated as he led his horse from the barn. "Hush now," he told them gruffly. "Weber will look in on you." He paused in the cabin doorway one last time, looking at the empty chair by the hearth. The memory of Delilah reading scripture there, lamplight gentle on her face, strengthened his resolve. "Hold on, child," he whispered. "I'm coming." The mare's hooves crunched in the crusty snow as they started down the trail. Storm clouds gathered over the peaks, promising more snow, but Nathaniel pushed on. His leg ached fiercely in the cold, yet he barely noticed the pain. Every step carried him closer to Denver, to Delilah, to making things right. He thought of her face that Christmas Eve, transformed by joy at the simple gift of a carved comb. No mansion full of silk and silver could replace the pure happiness she'd found here in their humble cabin. No amount of society's polish could improve the genuine kindness of her heart. The trail wound down through stands of pine, snow still deep in the shadows. Nathaniel's mare picked her way carefully, steam puffing from her nostrils. He'd tied his cane to the saddle, knowing he'd need both hands for the treacherous descent. "Steady now," he murmured to the horse. "Long way yet to go." The sun climbed higher, but dark clouds continued gathering. Nathaniel studied them with experienced eyes, reading the promise of snow by evening. He'd need to make good time to reach the next shelter before the storm hit. His thoughts returned to Delilah as he rode. He remembered her determination to learn every task, no matter how difficult. The way she'd insisted on helping him despite his gruff protests. Her quiet strength had earned his respect long before it won his heart. Now she faced a different kind of challenge, one that threatened to break her spirit rather than strengthen it. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Augustus Truesdale might have wealth and the law on his side, but he didn't know the first thing about his daughter's heart. The mare stumbled slightly on loose shale, bringing Nathaniel's focus back to the trail. He couldn't help Delilah if he didn't reach Denver safely. One step at a time, 1 mile at a time. Like she'd taught him during those long winter months, patience and persistence would see them through. Wind picked up as they descended, carrying the bite of approaching snow. Nathaniel pulled his coat tighter, but his resolve never wavered. Somewhere in a Denver mansion, Delilah was trapped in a life that would slowly suffocate her. He'd failed to protect her once when the riders came. He wouldn't fail her again. "Coming, child," he whispered into the wind. "Just hold on." The mare plodded steadily onward as the first snowflakes began to fall. Above them, the mountains disappeared into thickening clouds, but Nathaniel kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay Denver, and Delilah, and the fight to bring her home where she belonged. Snow fell in thick curtains as Nathaniel guided his mare through the mountain pass. The wind cut through his wool coat, but he pressed on, knowing each step brought him closer to Denver. His leg throbbed with familiar pain, worse in the bitter cold, but he barely noticed it now. His thoughts remained fixed on Delilah. The first night he sheltered in an abandoned line shack, its roof half collapsed under the weight of snow. He cleared enough space to spread his bedroll and built a small fire in the broken hearth. As he chewed dried beef and hard biscuits, the empty darkness pressed in around him. He missed Delilah's quiet presence, her soft humming as she worked, the way she'd known just when to speak and when to let silence comfort. Morning brought fresh snow and harder going. His mare struggled through drifts that reached her chest in places. Nathaniel had to dismount often to break trail, his cane sinking deep with each step. By midday, his clothes were soaked with sweat despite the cold, and his breath came in harsh gasps. "Steady now," he murmured to the horse as they rested in the lee of a granite outcrop. "Can't help her if we don't make it down in one piece." The second night found him sharing fire with a grizzled trader headed north. The man's pack mules huddled together against the storm while their masters hunched near the flames, sharing coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in. "Heading to Denver, you say?" The trader squinted at Nathaniel through the smoke. "Ain't the season for social calls." "Got business with Augustus Truesdale," Nathaniel replied carefully. The trader's weathered face grew serious. "Watch yourself there, friend. Truesdale owns half the judges in Colorado Territory, and most of the lawmen too. His gold greases plenty of palms." "Known that for years," Nathaniel said grimly. "Scouted for his mining operations once. Back before." He trailed off, remembering those days. Truesdale had paid well, but his ambition had left a trail of broken promises and ruined land. "Heard he found his long-lost daughter," the trader continued. "Papers are full of it, though word is she ain't exactly what he hoped for. Too common, they say, too rough around the edges." Nathaniel's hands tightened on his cup. Man ought to be grateful just to have his child back. "Ought to be," the trader agreed. "But men like Truesdale, they see everything as property to be shaped to their liking, even flesh and blood." Sleep eluded Nathaniel that night. He lay watching sparks spiral up into darkness, remembering Delilah's quiet strength. How many times had she mentioned feeling worthless, unwanted? Now she faced a different kind of rejection, judged not for her gentle heart, but for failing to meet her father's expectations. Days blurred together as he pushed on. The mare's coat grew ragged with frost, her steps slower but still steady. They passed through small mining camps where suspicious eyes followed their progress. Nathaniel avoided conversation, stopping only long enough to replenish supplies and rest his mount. A week into the journey, the peaks finally fell behind them. The trail widened, showing more frequent use. They passed homesteads with smoke rising from chimneys, fields lying fallow under snow. Signs of civilization grew more common: fences, telegraph poles, rutted wagon tracks. The air changed too, growing thick with coal smoke and the press of humanity. Nathaniel's chest tightened as Denver's sprawl came into view. Brick buildings shouldered against each other where timber had stood not long ago. Streets crowded with wagons and riders stretched toward the horizon. He led his mare carefully through the chaos, dodging streetcars and cursing the way his cane slipped on the cobblestones. Everything felt wrong. The press of bodies, the clamor of commerce, the sharp angles of progress cutting into sky that should have held only clouds and mountain peaks. Asking directions brought him to the wealthy quarter, where mansions sat back from the street behind iron fences. Here the noise dimmed, as if prosperity itself muffled the city's rough edges. The Truesdale estate dominated the neighborhood, its grounds spreading across nearly a full block. Nathaniel dismounted stiffly before the main gate. his legs trembling from cold and exhaustion. The marble facade of Truesdale's mansion rose like a mountain of wealth, its windows staring down at him like dead eyes. Somewhere behind those walls, Delilah waited, perhaps dressed in silk now, but no doubt as trapped as she'd ever been in any orphanage. He remembered her joy in simple things, gathering eggs, feeding goats, watching sunset paint the peaks gold. What use were crystal chandeliers to a soul that found heaven in morning frost on pine needles? What comfort could Persian carpets offer feet that knew the honest dirt of garden paths? The mare nudged his shoulder and Nathaniel realized he'd been standing motionless, lost in thought. He patted her neck, feeling the trail dust thick in her coat. His own clothes were travel-stained, his beard untrimmed. He knew he looked more mountain man than proper visitor, but that couldn't be helped. "No point delaying," he muttered, checking that his cane was secure. The weight of his rifle, still strapped to the saddle, caught his attention. After a moment's hesitation, he left it there. This was a battle that weapons couldn't win. A liveried servant appeared as Nathaniel approached the gate, looking down his nose at the trail-worn visitor. "The tradesman's entrance is around back." "I'm here to see Augustus Truesdale," Nathaniel said firmly, "about his daughter." The servant's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Mr. Truesdale is not receiving visitors today." "He'll see me." Nathaniel met the man's gaze steadily. "Tell him Nathaniel Brandt is here about Delilah." For a long moment, the servant seemed ready to refuse. Then he turned with careful dignity and disappeared through the front door. Nathaniel waited, leaning on his cane, studying the mansion's cold grandeur. The windows remained blank, giving no hint of life within. But somewhere behind that marble mask, Delilah waited, perhaps watching even now, hoping someone would remember her true worth. A clock tower told the hour in the distance. Nathaniel straightened his spine, ignored the screaming protest from his tired muscles. The servant reappeared, his manner somehow both stiff and uncertain. "Mr. Truesdale will see you." The gate swung open with well-oiled silence. "This way, if you please." Nathaniel took a deep breath, tasting coal smoke and civilization. He'd crossed mountains and weathered storms to reach this moment. Now came the real challenge, convincing a powerful man that wealth couldn't buy happiness, that true family grew from love rather than blood. "I'm coming, child," he whispered, and followed the servant up the marble steps. The servant led Nathaniel through polished halls where his boots left muddy tracks on imported carpets. Oil paintings in gilt frames stared down at him, stern-faced men and women dressed in finery, their eyes following his limping progress. The air hung heavy with beeswax and tobacco, so different from the clean pine scent of his cabin. The parlor doors swung open on silent hinges. Nathaniel's heart clenched at the sight of Delilah perched on the edge of a velvet settee, her familiar round frame now wrapped in silk the color of summer roses. Her hands lay folded in her lap, fingers worrying at the lace of her cuffs. She kept her eyes down, but he saw how they glistened with unshed tears. Augustus Truesdale stood by the marble fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel in a pose of studied elegance. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his black suit immaculate. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. "Mr. Brandt," Truesdale's voice held the chill of mountain streams. "I understand you've come quite a distance uninvited." "I came for Delilah." Nathaniel planted his cane firmly, meeting the older man's gaze. "Ah, yes. The man who harbored my daughter without alerting authorities." Truesdale's fingers drummed once on the marble. "I should have you arrested." "Father, please," Delilah's voice quavered. "Be silent, girl." Truesdale didn't even look at her. "You've caused enough trouble." Nathaniel's grip tightened on his cane. "She's not property to be claimed, Mr. Truesdale. She's a soul God blessed with more courage than most men I've known." What would a mountain hermit know of God's blessings? Truesdale's lip curled. "Look at you, trail-worn, unwashed, tracking mud through my home. What right have you to speak of my daughter's future?" "The right of one who's watched her face down mountain lions to protect our goats." Nathaniel took a step forward. "Who's seen her haul water through waist-deep snow without complaint? Who's felt her gentle hands tend fever while she prayed through the night for my life?" Color rose in Truesdale's cheeks. Menial labor and frontier hardships. Is that what you think she deserves? This is my daughter, my blood. She belongs in society, among her peers. She belongs where she's loved. Nathaniel's voice rang through the parlor. Where she's valued for her heart, not her bloodline. Where she can hold her head high instead of being scolded into silence. Delilah's head came up at that, her eyes wide. She half rose from the settee, hands trembling. You forget yourself, sir. Truesdale's voice dropped dangerously. I've spent years searching for my child. Now that I've found her, do you think I'll let her return to some crude cabin in the wilderness, with a crippled old man who can barely support himself? I didn't come asking permission. Nathaniel met his glare steadily. I came because that crude cabin was the first place she ever felt truly welcome. Because when she arrived on my doorstep, she'd never known a Christmas gift or a kind word. Because she deserves to choose her own path. Choose? Truesdale laughed harshly. What does a child know of choosing? She needs guidance, proper upbringing. She needs love. Nathaniel's words cut through the bitter laughter. Not lectures on deportment. Not silk dresses that hide her true self. Not a father who won't even look at her while he decides her fate. Silence fell like snow. Delilah stood fully now, her hands clasped at her throat where the locket still hung. He's right, Father. Her voice shook but held firm. Mr. Brandt, Nathaniel, he saw me, really saw me. Not as someone to be molded or married off advantageously, just as myself. You don't understand what you're saying. Truesdale finally turned to her, his face flushed. You're my heir. The Truesdale name. Is that all I am to you? Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks. A name to be preserved? I thought when you found me, when you recognized Mother's locket, that perhaps… She swallowed hard. But you don't want me. You want the daughter you lost, pretty and polished and perfect, not the girl I've become. That's not… Truesdale started forward, but Delilah stepped back, moving closer to Nathaniel. In 3 months at the cabin, I learned more about family than I have in 3 weeks here. Her voice grew stronger. Nathaniel taught me to split wood, to read weather in the clouds, to face my fears. He listened when I read scripture. He saw strength in me when I felt worthless. That's what a father does. Nathaniel felt moisture in his own eyes as she continued. You haven't asked once what happened to me all these years. Haven't wondered what I survived, what I learned, who I became. You just want to remake me into someone else. She reached for Nathaniel's arm. I choose him. I choose our little cabin and honest work and simple meals blessed with gratitude. You would throw away your inheritance? Truesdale's voice cracked. Your position in society? Everything I've built for you? I would choose love over luxury. Delilah's tears flowed freely now. Please, Father. If you truly want to give me something, give me my freedom. Let me go home. Truesdale staggered slightly, catching himself against the mantel. For the first time, Nathaniel saw past the wealthy man's facade to the grief beneath, the years of searching, the dream of reunion shattered by reality. Mr. Truesdale, Nathaniel spoke quietly now, you can't order love, nor buy it with fine things, but you could earn it, if you're willing to see your daughter for who she is, not who you wished she'd be. The older man's shoulders slumped. He looked suddenly tired, the carefully maintained mask cracking to show the pain beneath. I searched for you so long, he whispered. When they took you, when your mother died of grief, I thought if I just found you, everything would be right again. It still could be. Delilah's voice gentled. Not the way you planned, but perhaps better. Real, at least. Truesdale turned to stare into the fire. Long moments passed while Nathaniel held his breath. Finally, the Mind Baron straightened. The inheritance will be placed in trust, he said hoarsely. Available when, if, you choose to claim it. He cleared his throat. You're free to go, though perhaps you might write occasionally. Let me know how you fare. I will. Delilah crossed to him swiftly, pressed a kiss to his cheek. "Thank you, Father." Truesdale didn't move as she hurried from the room, presumably to change clothes and gather her few possessions. Only when her footsteps faded did he speak again. "Take care of her, Brant." His voice was rough with emotion. "She deserves that much at least." "She deserves everything," Nathaniel replied quietly. "But love will be a good start." He turned to follow Delilah, leaving Augustus Truesdale alone with his empire of marble and gold, and the knowledge that some treasures couldn't be bought at any price. The wagon wheels creaked through melting snow as Nathaniel and Delilah made their slow way north. Spring's first whispers softened the mountain air, though frost still painted the mornings white. They'd traded Nathaniel's tired mare for a sturdy wagon in Denver, letting them travel more comfortably as the thaw began. Delilah sat beside him on the wooden seat, her face bright despite the lingering chill. She'd changed back into her simple dress the moment they'd left the city, folding away the silks like a forgotten dream. Now her hands were rough again from camp chores, but her smile came easier than it had in the mansion's gilded halls. "Smells like rain coming," she said, tilting her face to the clouds. The skill of reading weather had stayed with her, even after weeks in Denver's sheltered parlors. Nathaniel nodded, adjusting his grip on the reins. "Reckon we'll stop at the next way station. No sense pushing through storm with spring mud already making the trail treacherous." They found shelter at a small trading post just as the first drops fell. The keeper, a weathered woman named Mrs. Hanson, welcomed them with hot coffee and fresh bread. Other travelers gathered around the common room's pot-bellied stove. A missionary couple, 2 tin peddlers, and a family heading west to Oregon. "Ain't many folks heading into the high country this time of year," one peddler remarked as they shared their meal. "We're going home," Delilah said simply, passing cornbread to the missionary's wife. The word home carried such warmth that Nathaniel had to look away, his throat tight. That evening, as rain drummed on the tin roof, Delilah sat with the Oregon-bound children, teaching them the hand games she'd learned in the orphanage. Their mother watched with grateful eyes. The long journey had worn on the little ones. "Your daughter has such a gentle way with children," she told Nathaniel. He didn't correct her assumption of their relationship. The truth was more complex than blood anyway. Instead, he watched Delilah's patient demonstrations, remembering how she'd once been just as uncertain and lost herself. Later, when the others had bedded down, Delilah joined him by the stove's dying embers. "The mansion was so quiet," she said softly, watching the flames. Everything echoed, footsteps, whispers, even breathing. The servants moved like ghosts, and Father, he looked right through me most days. She twisted her hands in her lap. All that space, all that richness, but it felt like being wrapped in silk shrouds. Nathaniel laid his calloused hand over hers, stilling their nervous movement. "Some folks mistake fancy things for happiness. I had new dresses every day but couldn't get warm." Her voice caught. "They tried to teach me proper manners, how to be a lady, but all I could think about was our cabin, the way the fire crackles just before snow, how the morning light comes through the east window, the smell of pine smoke and leather and coffee." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "I missed home." The word settled between them like a blessing. They continued north as the days lengthened. At each stop, Delilah shared what they had with fellow travelers: coffee, bread, simple kindness. She'd learned the value of such gifts, and her years of wanting and wealth hadn't changed that part of her heart. The wagon creaked higher into the mountains where patches of snow still lingered in shadowed valleys. Nathaniel's leg ached from the constant jolting, but he barely noticed, too aware of how Delilah straightened with recognition at each familiar landmark. "Look," she pointed one morning as they crested a ridge. "The lightning-struck pine where we saw the eagle's nest." The trail wound past the scorched tree, and Delilah's excitement grew with each familiar turn. When they finally rounded the last bend, the cabin stood waiting below, smoke already rising from the chimney. "Martha Jensen must have kept the fire going like she promised," Nathaniel said, but Delilah was already scrambling down from the wagon. The goats crowded the fence, bleating welcome as she reached through to scratch their ears. "Oh, you sweet things. Did you miss us? Did you behave for Mrs. Jensen?" Nathaniel climbed down more slowly, his bad legs stiff from the journey. The cabin looked exactly as they'd left it. Solid logs silvered by weather, snow melting from the shake roof, the wood pile neat against the north wall. Yet somehow it seemed more beautiful than he remembered. Inside, Martha Jensen had left everything clean and ready, fresh kindling by the hearth, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a pot of beans soaking on the table. Delilah moved through the familiar space like a dancer coming home to music she knew by heart. "Everything's just as it should be," she breathed, running her hand along the rough-hewn table edge. Nathaniel built up the fire while Delilah put away their traveling goods. Soon the cabin filled with warmth and the smell of coffee brewing. As darkness gathered outside, they settled into their old evening rhythm, Nathaniel in his carved chair with his whittling, Delilah humming as she kneaded dough for morning bread. The firelight caught the silver chain of her locket still hanging at her throat. But now it seemed less a burden of mystery than a bridge between past and present, a reminder that love could be lost and found again, that family was more than blood and wealth. Delilah's voice filled the cabin's familiar corners, her contentment clear in every note. Nathaniel's knife moved steadily over the wood in his hands, shaping something new from the ancient heart of pine. Outside, spring wind whispered through the trees, while inside, father and daughter built their future one quiet moment at a time. Morning sunlight spilled across the meadow, turning frost-tipped grass to glittering silver. The last patches of snow had finally retreated to shadowed hollows, surrendering to spring's gentle invasion. Crocuses pushed through the softening earth, their purple and white faces lifted to catch the warming rays. Nathaniel leaned on his cane as he and Delilah made their way up the gentle slope. The familiar weight of his old Winchester rifle was slung across his back, its worn leather strap creaking softly with each step. They paused at the wooden cross marking Sarah's grave, where tender green shoots were already reaching toward light. Delilah knelt to brush away dead leaves from around the marker. "The flowers are so pretty here," she said softly, like God knew this place needed special beauty. Nathaniel's throat tightened. Sarah always loved spring blooms, said they were proof that winter can't last forever. They stood quietly for a moment, the mountain breeze carrying the sweet scent of warming earth and new growth. Then Nathaniel unslung the rifle, checking its action with practiced hands. "Time you learned to handle this proper," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. "Can't always count on banging pots to scare off mountain lions." Delilah's eyes widened. "Me? But I've never—" "Everyone starts somewhere." He showed her how to hold the weapon, adjusting her grip with patient hands. "Stock tight against your shoulder like this. Lean into it some. It'll kick otherwise." She mimicked his stance, though her movements were uncertain. "What if I miss?" "Then you miss." He smiled. "Ain't nobody born knowing how to shoot straight. Takes practice and patience, just like anything worth doing." He positioned himself beside her, supporting her arms as she sighted down the barrel toward a distant pine stump. "Breathe easy now. When you're ready, squeeze the trigger smooth. Don't jerk it." The rifle cracked, the sound echoing off the valley walls. Delilah stumbled back slightly from the recoil, letting out a surprised laugh. "Oh, it's so much louder up close." "Missed by a fair piece," Nathaniel chuckled, "but that'll come right with practice." Pride warmed his voice. "You held steady, though. That's the important part." They spent the next hour working on her aim, Nathaniel's instruction punctuated by Delilah's determined efforts and occasional bursts of laughter at her wilder shots. The spring sun climbed higher, burning away the last wisps of morning mist from the valley below. "That's enough for today," Nathaniel finally said, noting how she was beginning to tire. "Besides, reckon that bread you set to rising will be about ready." They made their way back down the meadow slope, Delilah carefully carrying the rifle as he'd shown her. The cabin waited below, smoke curling from its chimney into the clear mountain air. The rich smell of baking bread met them at the door. Inside, Delilah hurried to check the oven while Nathaniel stored the rifle in its proper place above the mantel. Warm golden light filled the cabin, touching everything with a gentle glow. The smooth-worn table, the rack of drying herbs, the patchwork quilt Delilah had mended during those first uncertain days. As evening settled over the mountains, they shared fresh bread and stew by lamplight. Delilah's voice lifted in an old hymn she'd learned in the orphanage, the familiar words filling every corner of their home with peaceful certainty. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Nathaniel watched her across the table, remembering the frightened girl who'd stepped down from the stagecoach months ago. Now she moved through their shared space with quiet confidence, her presence as natural as sunrise. When she finished singing, Delilah met his gaze. "I used to think no one would ever want me," she said softly, "that I was too different, too much." She touched her locket, but without the old anxiety. "Even when I found out about Father, about being a Truesdale, it didn't feel real. Not like this does." "Families come in all sorts," Nathaniel replied, his voice rough with feeling. "Some you're born to, some you choose. Some choose you." "I'll never believe I'm unwanted again," she said firmly. "Not ever." Through the cabin window, stars were beginning to brighten in the deepening blue of evening. A gentle mountain wind carried the scent of pine and new grass, lifting Delilah's words skyward like a prayer of thanksgiving. Nathaniel nodded, unable to speak past the fullness in his heart. Once he'd been certain he would die alone up here, bitter and forgotten. Instead, Grace had sent him an unexpected daughter, transforming his shelter into a true home, one filled with warmth and laughter and second chances. The lamp flame danced, casting their shadows on the log walls. Outside, a whippoorwill called to welcome the night, while inside, father and daughter sat in contented silence, knowing at last they were exactly where they belonged. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark, today make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.